Well, I'm actually going to get started because I want to make sure that we are very respectful of everyone's time. I know that we'll have people coming in the next few minutes. I am Deb Ryan. I am the co-chair for government relations for North Carolina for SACAC, which is an extraordinary organization, which I love. And I'm very happy to be here today. I'm an independent educational consultant in Eastern North Carolina. The bulk of my clients are in the Triangle region, though, in Wake County particularly. And I'm also the college advisor for a small Christian school out here in rural North Carolina. This is actually my last year as the co-chair for government relations. So if anyone's interested in joining this great work, please let me know. It'd be great. And then Jane Ann, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly? I know there's noise behind you, but.
Yes, I'm Jane Ann Tager. I'm a public high school counselor for a charter school in Asheville, North Carolina. And my title is college and career counselor. So I'm focused on post-secondary planning with our students. It's great to be here, and thank you for everyone who is here.
And I'm just going to introduce all of our presenters really quickly and just kind of talk through what our agenda is going to look like. So what we'd like to do is have our presenters are each going to speak for about 7 to 10 minutes. And then we'd like for them to all speak, and then we'll open the floor for question and answer. Because I think if we answer questions in the midst of it, we could get sidetracked really easily. So I want to make sure they all have space and time to speak. Jane Ann and I will monitor the chat for questions. And at the end, once we open up a Q&A, you can also just raise your hand in the and then we'll call on you. I just want to say hello to our presenters. We're so grateful for your time, and just say who everyone is. So David Hawkins is NACAC's Chief Education and Policy Officer. He's also one of my favorite human beings and is always so willing to share his insights and share his experience and sort of give us the overview of all of college admissions, which is phenomenal. David Hinojosa, we are so honored to have you here with us today. I know you're on a train, and so we're so grateful for you to be taking time out of your busy schedule. David is the Director of Education Opportunities Project at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law. And for us in North Carolina, he has incredibly particular impact. He argued on behalf of UNC in front of the Supreme Court very recently in a case that we're all familiar with and waiting with bated breath about what the outcome will be for race-conscious admissions. Matt, I'm hoping is here. I haven't seen him come in yet, but Matt is the Director of Education and Law Project at the North Carolina Justice Center, has also been very involved with race-conscious admissions, and particularly Leandro. So the Leandro case is something that he's going to talk to us about hopefully today, which is something that is really K-12 in North Carolina, but I think has direct impacts on what is going to unfold for the students who are heading to our higher education institutions, particularly our public system, over the next few years. And then Bob Schaeffer is here, another hero, who is the Public Education Director for FairTest, which is an organization I think many of us are very familiar with. And Bob is going to speak with us about other ways that schools can actually promote access within their institutions, depending on what might happen this coming spring. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And David, if you would love to just, what's going on in this world? We would love to hear your thoughts about where we are. Oh, and
well, yay, good. We're all here. Deb, thank you for that lovely introduction. The feeling is very much mutual. I really appreciate that you're willing to take time to manage these efforts to lead advocacy in North Carolina. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time out to contribute to advocacy. It's such an important thing to do, and I know it takes a lot of time. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a quick update of the things that we're working on here at NACAC on the federal level. Just to give you a sense, it'll be really, it'll be really quick. So I won't, I hope that that you'll feel free to send me questions. I cannot be on the full call, so I'll probably miss the Q&A, but I've put my email address in the chat, so you should feel free to send me an email afterwards, and I'd be glad to follow up. But we're looking right now here at NACAC at 3 major priority areas. 1 is student and equity-centered admission practices. 2 is ethics in college admission, and 3 is support for school counselors and college advising. So under the first bucket area, we are, the biggest issue on the table clearly is the Supreme Court decision. And of course, I'll let David Hinojosa talk about that. just know that NACAC has submitted a brief to the Supreme Court. We are obviously watching what's going to happen, and we are in the process of developing education and resources for our members afterwards. We want to equip our admissions community to deal with whatever the decision is. And we also want to talk to our college advising, school counseling, and even the road warriors in higher education as to how to talk to students and families once this decision is out. So much more to come from NACAC on that. We've also in this area conducted research and convened a group with Lumina Foundation support earlier this year to provide recommendations about how we can rethink college admissions. We're dealing with a system that was designed in the 19th century, and of course we've tweaked it over the years, but so much of it is probably irrelevant in so many ways at many institutions that there's substantial space for it to innovate. And so we issued a report that I would try to link before I leave earlier this year with our colleagues at the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators to provide some broad recommendations about how we can begin to rethink and reshape college admission. And in light of the Supreme Court case, we really wanted to expand the playing field for equity, because we've been so focused on this one question about whether you can consider race or ethnicity as part of the application consideration. We feel like we need to start really improving or expanding the field on which we're playing here. We need to move well beyond this and think about other ways we can champion equity in the process. On the ethics front, there's two broad areas that we're looking to advocate on. Number one, many of you probably know that at the core of NACAC and our affiliates is a set of best practices for ethical admission practice. We used to enforce these practices. We no longer do, thanks to a Department of Justice investigation, inquiry into our practices, which we eventually had to compromise and say that we'll move towards a best practice stance. So no longer enforcing those ethical practices, but now want to get into the business of educating professionals, the public, and policymakers about what these best practices are and why they're best practices. As you probably know, these practices are in place because we want to protect students' interests in the process. So that's an important thing that we want to take on in the future. We also want to continue to do our work to protect students from predatory recruitment practices. Some of you may have seen the fact that there are a number of for-profit colleges that have engaged for decades in all sorts of shady recruitment. And we want to make sure that in our post-enforcement era and in our continued attempts to try to protect students and taxpayers against fraud and abuse, that we present a strong student protection agenda for public policymakers, as well as institutional and admission office actors. The third major bucket is support for school counselors and college advising. We have been strongly supportive of the Biden administration's plan to invest $1 billion in hiring new school mental health professionals, which of course includes school counselors. And while it's not necessarily in the scope of the college advising work, we are very much supportive of our school counselors, and will support whatever policies we need to get more of them into the schools. We've also actually got an action alert right now about an appropriations measure that would provide states with funding that they can use for college advising, school counseling, and college prep coursework. So lots of budget and appropriations work going on here in Washington. Outside of those three areas, those are areas where we really lead because that's the closest to our expertise as an association. And you can kind of see who we are reflected in that. You have the admissions and the counseling side, and then of course that common ground around ethics. But outside of those priorities where we lead, we do also have areas that we support. And a few examples of that, we have supported the administration's effort to double the Pell Grant. In fact, are part of a coalition of higher ed organizations that are advocating for doubling the Pell Grant, and we're certainly asking Congress to follow suit there. So as soon as they get around to passing appropriations bills again, which is a dereliction of duty on their part, we will hope to get that done. Obviously, supporting our undocumented students. Right now, there is an action alert active here at NACAC to urge Congress to act on the DREAM Act, because as you probably know, DACA, which was a sort of an interim policy instituted by the Obama administration, has done a lot of good, but in the courts, it has gone back and forth, and it's just we just wish Congress would solve this problem by passing the DREAM Act or some other such legislation that can help students who have gone to high school, gone to school, grown up here in the U.S. and just don't have options for post-secondary educations because of a gap in our immigration policy. And then finally, I'll just note that overall, we see higher ed as a public good. So as we move forward, we want to broaden access to higher education in a manner similar to how we've provided access to K-12 education in the United States. I think it's only a matter of time before this happens. It might be a long slog and it might be one that takes a lot of effort, but it's something that we're very committed to. So all of these priorities that we're trying to work towards are ultimately in service of that large goal. And so we look forward to working with our members and with our affiliates to make that happen. One quick note about the state level is that we do provide a lot of support to our affiliates for state level legislation. We can see what's going on in the states through our monitoring capabilities here, but we really rely on you to help us identify those priorities that are most closely aligned with yours and ours. So I've worked closely with Deb over the last couple of years to help her set up the North Carolina process and also identify opportunities for us to help to move the ball down the field there in North Carolina. And I'll just close by saying that your work in North Carolina is near and dear to my heart as well. I was born in Fayetteville, lived in Gastonia for a while, lived in Mebane, North Carolina for a while. And have been a lifelong Tar Heel fan. So I don't know, that probably puts me in different categories according to your allegiances. But in any event, of course, love all of our affiliates. But what you all are doing in North Carolina is really, really important and really valued here at NACAC. So thank you, Deb, for the opportunity to share. And I'll turn it over to the next David, I think.
Yes, please. David and Hinojosa, thank you so much for being with us. We are so grateful. We can see your journey happening behind you. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And we are so excited to hear sort of what has happened in your world in the last month, which I think is a lot of things.
All right, thanks very much, Deb. Do you hear me okay? Okay, and I do have an echo in my ear. I'm not going to try to take care of it. I'm just going to go with it. So hopefully it won't be too disturbing. And I do want to say it's wonderful hearing what David Hawkins was saying this morning, because it's so refreshing to see a national organization of professionals, tackling so many important issues, from the for-profit sector to supporting undocumented students on so many levels. Oftentimes this falls under the radar, and it's one of the priorities. These are among the highest priorities of your organization. So we appreciate hearing that, and also appreciate the partnership that we've engaged in, and look forward to continuing, especially in light of the decision that will be coming next June in the Supreme Court cases, which is what I'm going to be speaking about here. And I have a short PowerPoint to run through. Am I able to just share my screen?
I think you should be able to. Yes, sir.
Try this. Y'all see my screen?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
All right.
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Okay. All right. So my name is David Hinojosa. I'm the director of the Educational Opportunities Project and Lawyers Committee. I was honored and privileged to argue before the U.S. Supreme Court in the Students for Fair Admissions versus UNC. We represent a multiracial group of students at UNC. They're now alumni. This case started in 2015. But I want to just go over some basic facts of the case, and then I'll turn to 5 issues that I think that you, especially as admissions counselors, enrollment agents, and the like, may want to keep on your radar. So these 2 cases, the cases against Harvard, there's 2 separate cases, one against Harvard, one against UNC. Harvard, private university in the country. UNC is the oldest public university in the country. UNC also fought integration since its founding in 1789 through the 1980s. Was still fighting integration. They also had a number of relics and remnants on the campus, buildings named after white supremacists and so forth. the institution itself was built to help educate the children of slave owners. So from its very beginning, rolling through 2 centuries later, it's important to understand, the context of the challenges that face the UNC in recruiting, enrolling, and retaining students of color. So I'm not going to get heavy into the claims. What you should know that in the 2 cases, they are different cases. They actually have different claims. So there's 3 similar claims. One is that race should not be allowed to be considered for admissions at all. The second similar claim is that that race neutral alternatives, so alternatives that might be able to be used in place of race, such as a percentage plan, a top X percent of students graduating from North Carolina, for example, the consideration of income instead of race. Can you do those plans work about as well as the consideration of race at UNC? And then the other similar claim is that race is being used as more than a plus factor. Again, these are their allegations. There was a trial that I'll get to very shortly just to wrap up. But those are the 3 similar claims. There are no claims against UNC about them racial balancing Black students or Latinx students or Native American students. They do have that claim against Harvard. There also is not an intentional discrimination claim against Asian American students vis-a-vis white students. So at Harvard, they're saying one of their claims is that Harvard was intentionally discriminating against Asian American students and was giving preferences to white students. They do not have that similar claim. All this, the reason why I mention this is because all this gets very mushy in the media, and they try and treat these cases the same way. Even in the argument, they were talking about racial balancing the UNC case, and I'm like, wait a second, you don't even have a racial balancing claim. And then finally, the remedy is similar in these cases. They are seeking to ban any consideration of race in admissions as a plus factor, to restrict admission staff from being aware of or learn the race or ethnicity. Now, on this second remedy, I do want to make sure that I'm clear about this, that they walked back this particular remedy during the Harvard trial and at UNC. They said that they're not asking to blind admissions counsel, but in the argument that was raised, there were some confusing points that they were kind of raising around this issue that I'll try to briefly dip into. But a couple of other things that you should know about the trials. They were long trials. There was a 3-week trial in Harvard, a 2-week trial in UNC. There were highly talented students of color of all races, including Asian American students who testified in the Harvard case, the Black and Latinx students and white students who testified in the UNC case in support of affirmative action. There is no evidence that any of these students who were admitted at either school were not qualified. And no students testified for Students for Fair Admissions. Matter of fact, Ed Bloom, who is the architect of these lawsuits, did not testify himself in these cases. In the UNC case, all they did was have 2 experts who testified, and their analysis was severely criticized by the district court. The district court, in both opinions, issued well-reasoned, deep, extensive opinions showing that SFFA failed to prove its claims at the end of the day. So now, those cases went up on appeal. They went up to the Supreme Court on October 31st, and it was a very hot bench. It's 5 hours of argument between the 2 cases. There was really only about an hour and a half that was scheduled for the UNC case, but the argument went well over 2.5 hours there. And we expect a decision in June. Right. So let me see where I'm at on time. I think I only have like a few minutes. I did want to make sure that you knew who the students were who testified in this case. They come from all over the country, but including North Carolina, Hendersonville, in the Durham area, Chapel Hill area, as well as Kentucky and Kansas. And some of them were alumni who testified. We also had 2 experts who are in the lower right-hand corner who testified, including one who testified unrebutted testimony about the history of discrimination at UNC and in North Carolina. So the 5 things, I'll come back to this in a little bit, but that you should know about are that race conscious admissions does not equal race discrimination. Right? The whole case is about whether or not race can be considered without being a decisive factor. It's never been seen as a single factor. I probably should have muted myself there. All right. But this is not direct discrimination against white students. There's no negative points that are made for white students. It's similar to what at UNC, they give a preference for veterans, right? Looking at all the qualifications of applicants who are veterans. They may consider that in a positive way, being a veteran. Same thing with first generation status. But the people who are not veterans aren't getting minus points, right? And the same thing that was reflected here with respect to white and Asian American students. It's just a fundamental misunderstanding of that. There were powerful stories from the clients who talked about the discriminatory treatment by high school counselors, where they were advised and counseled against taking advanced placement courses, against taking more challenging courses, and they had to basically fight to try and get into those courses. And those, of course, matter for admissions purposes, right? When you're trying to evaluate students. There's also the inequitable playing field in K-12 schools. I know Matt's going to be talking about that more in a little bit. It's a case that the Lawyers Committee is actively litigating and litigated before the Supreme Court, and are great partners with North Carolina Justice Center, who is also our partners in this litigation representing UNC students in North Carolina Justice Center, our co-counsel in the case. And let me get to the second point. You know, these cases are only about the consideration of race as a factor in admissions. So can you provide a plus factor to underrepresented students of color, so long as you meet the tenets of strict scrutiny? I won't get into that, but it's a very high bar for universities to be able to even consider race in the first instance. But other factors are also included, including extracurricular, work history, income, grades, etc. You all know this more than I do. The decision should not impact whether racialized experiences generally might be considered. So there was this odd discussion about during the Supreme Court about whether someone's race or culture could be considered in the context of an essay. So Justice Brown Jackson had posed a question, a hypothetical, to their attorney, suggesting that, well, let's say that there's a student that is a 5th generation UNC student. It's a white student who talks about the proud tradition of going to UNC and being a Tar Heel. And they talk about this in their essay about how and why they should be admitted and how they would be a great student at UNC. But let's say that there's a 5th generation descendant of Black slaves in UNC. And they talk about this history of their family being excluded, not even being provided a great education, K-12, much less being prepared to go to college. Could that experience be considered by the university? Their counsel said no, because slavery would be a proxy for Blackness. But you're not actually, in that case, you wouldn't actually be admitting them because they're Black. You would be admitting them because of the great story that they have and the potential contribution to the university, the campus environment, right? And so I just want to make that clear, because there's a lot out there suggesting that these types of essays can't and shouldn't be written. We'll know a little bit more once the decisions come out. But, you know, again, the only thing that is supposed to be considered here by the court is whether race is considered as a plus factor. And fourth point is whether, and this goes to what Mr. Hawkins stated earlier, you know, racial equity and diversity must remain an attainable goal, regardless of the outcome of the decision. There are lots of things in recruitment and outreach, in building a more welcoming campus that universities can do. There's lots more in the K-12 sector that counselors and teachers and school and district leaders can do to help support students and build that stronger pipeline to higher education. I know we're going to hear from Mr. Schaeffer about, you know, the testing. So how much emphasis is put on testing should also, you know, be considered. And then finally, I believe that we will win. There's not many people who think that we're going to win, but we have the Constitution, the law, the facts on our side. The race-conscious admissions is affirmed by courts and justices who've been appointed by Reagan, who have been appointed by Nixon, and all the way since 1978. And it's important, the constant themes during the argument was, you know, the fair access and opportunity for all students to remain imperative for a true democracy. As was stated by Justice O'Connor in the Grutter opinion in 2003, which was a prior affirmative action case, effective participation by members of all racial and ethnic groups in the civic life of our nation is essential if the dream of one nation, indivisible, is to be realized. So I appreciate the opportunity again, and happy to answer any questions. And I apologize if I went over time. I'm not able to keep time limit talking through my phone, but using the computer.
No, thank you so much, David. We so appreciate the work that you've done. And I know that I spoke with I was on a different call earlier that that was sort of a recap of what had happened, and you weren't on the call, but several people were like, David just always makes us feel better about the world. And I just thought that you should know that you are definitely an inspiration to many. And they were like, you know, I feel very negative right now, but David always reminds me, like, no, justice is on our side. And so thank you for sort of providing that for so many of us. Matt, so happy to see you here. Thank you so much for joining us. We would love to hear sort of about the work that you've been doing, both on sort of the SCOTUS case and sort of within North Carolina itself.
Hi, thanks, Deb. And just to be clear, I haven't worked on that case. Our organization did on the Supreme Court case, but that wasn't me. But we have worked a lot on the Leandro case that we're going to talk about. And I'm always a little sheepish to talk after David because I enjoy learning from him, especially about this particular case. And he, of course, somehow is also an attorney in the Leandro case in North Carolina. He represents the plaintiff interveners, so he can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong here at all. But I've always appreciated his support and the work that we're doing here in North Carolina. So I'm at Ellinwood. I'm with the North Carolina Justice Center. And just talking about this case that maybe some of you have heard about in the news recently. We just recently had a decision in this case. This is a case that's been going on for a really long time. It was filed in 1994 by some low wealth districts in the state, alleging that they lacked the adequate resources to meet the state constitutional standards. So this Leandro case is, you know, one of a kind of a group of cases that have emerged over the years involving the interpretation of states' education provisions in state constitutions. I think North Carolina has a particularly strong constitutional provision that says that the state has to support a general and uniform system of public education wherein equal educational opportunities will be provided for all children, which I think nobody has ever really argued we do meet that part of the standard. But over the years, after this case was filed in 94, it was decided by the North Carolina Supreme Court in 1997, the first Leandro case, which established the constitutional standard that all students have the opportunity to receive a sound basic education, and that the state was failing to provide to the ability to meet that standard, particularly in the low wealth districts that brought it. But there are a lot of districts beyond those five counties, Polk, Halifax, Cumberland, Nash, and Robeson, counties in the low wealth counties in the eastern part of the state. But there's a lot of other counties that look just like those. And of course, there are disadvantaged students in every single district, even the most affluent ones. And over the years, we've kind of developed a definition of at-risk that includes students who are living in poverty, multilingual learners or English language learners, students with learning differences, students with disabilities, groups whose sort of achievement levels have always, there's always been an opportunity gap there that's large when compared with other students in the state. So this is, I think, very connected to your work, as you were saying. I think this is about having a standard of education that allows students to participate meaningfully and attend higher education, participate in society after they graduate from high school. And we've found repeatedly over the years that the state's failing to meet that standard. But the question was, how are we going to go about remedying that ongoing constitutional violation? So while the court has ordered the legislature at various times to develop a plan to meet the constitutional standard, the legislature never even developed a plan, much less implemented one. There have been some fits and starts of things like increased access to pre-K or investments and things like the disadvantaged student supplemental fund. But in recent years, we finally had, through the court process, they engaged with some expert consultants, Wested, Learning Policy Institute, partnered with local folks from NC State to do a really comprehensive analysis of our education system. And they came out with the comprehensive remedial plan in the case, which is an 8-year plan that involves $5 billion of investments. It's about 300 pages long. It's got all kinds of recommendations on various policy changes. It does a really strong job of, I think, directing resources to where they're needed most. There's a focus on teacher quality and the equitable distribution of teachers. Principals as well are a major focus. But it is a comprehensive plan from early childhood all the way on up into the transitions into college and career. So after 25 years of no plan being implemented to remedy the ongoing violation, the court determined that they had granted enough deference to the legislature in that period of time, and that something had to be done to uphold this really a strong and important place. The education provision is located in our Bill of Rights. It's a fundamental right, and that the court had to act in order to uphold that right on behalf of North Carolina's children. And we received an amazingly positive decision in that case in November. It is one of the best. I think David could probably speak. Not only do we think this plan is one of the best in the country, we think this is one of the strongest decisions that's ever been issued in a school resource adequacy and equity case across the nation. I can drop it in the chat. I would really recommend people take a look at this. It's a really good way to learn about the history of this constitutional provisions in our state and how this case evolved over the years. I wish this had existed when I first started here, so I could have learned about how this all has gone down over the many years a little bit easier. So this is it's a really beautiful decision. It's really strong. It involves years 2 and 3 of that comprehensive remedial plan that I mentioned at this point. And right now, where that case stands is it's going to the trial court to determine, how short was the funding included in the budget from meeting the requirements laid out in the comprehensive remedial plan. And at that point, we should get an order that directs the funds be released to the Department of Public Instruction, DHHS, because they run the early childhood system, and the UNC system for those kind of transitions to college that I was mentioning. So that's kind of the next step in the case. And then, of course, we still have years 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the plan, which I think the court determined that the full implementation of the plan is needed to meet the constitutional standard. But of course, there's a lot that needs to happen in the upcoming years, and we are working to encourage the legislature to follow the plan and implement it. I'm proud of, I think part of the history of the case is that it can be confusing to people because it's this big state level thing, districts against the state. It involves really large amounts of money, hundreds of millions of dollars. I think it's hard for people to understand what it means to them locally. So we've worked with, the other thing is it hasn't necessarily directly involved the perspectives of people who have had their constitutional rights most violated over this time period. So we thought it was really important to engage a coalition, a diverse coalition from across the state that represents those most adversely impacted student groups I mentioned, English learners, students with disabilities, students who are living in poverty, as well as the communities that are living in poverty and are, especially the original Leandro counties. So we helped build this Every Child NC coalition, and I'll drop some resources in as well. I'm really proud of that. I think we've been able to elevate the community voice into the discussions around Leandro. We don't think that you can implement a plan to uphold students' rights without engaging people who are much closer to them, who are working more directly with them, whether it's educators, advocates, community leaders. We submitted an amicus brief on behalf of those community groups in the case that had over 140 organizations from across the state sign on to it, everything large and small, grassroots organizations, all the way up to large philanthropic organizations signed on support. So we've been amazed. I think the Leandro is politicized like as a term, especially at the legislature. But then when you drill down into what's actually in the plan, it's much harder to object to any of it. When you look at it, what is it you don't want? Is it you don't want more students going to early childhood? Do you not need more nurses, counselors, therapists in our schools? Do you not need to improve teacher pay to attract and recruit and retain more teachers? Do you not believe in the community schools model? So I think that there's that element of we're trying to do community education to let people know what this could mean locally. So I'll just drop in. We have some good resources on the Every Child. Maybe I can share it. Let's see. I got too much open here. We've got some really good resources on our Every Child NC website that show kind of what would implementation of this plan look like in your county, to try to get away from that. It's just hard to understand some of these amounts of money and what they might mean locally. So let's see, it should work. So we tried to kind of drill down and show this is what it would mean in Wake County, for example. It would be a 28% increase in funding overall that could provide, 840 more teacher assistants, 36 community school coordinators, which really means creating a community school program in 36 different schools, 907 more nurses, psychologists, counselors, and social workers. That would be, obviously, there's a ton of mental health needs that have emerged in the wake of the pandemic that this would really help with. We've had huge cuts to our textbooks and instructional materials over the years. We want to provide professional development to teachers on, using restorative practices to reduce the use of suspension and expulsions. A lot of people haven't received training on working with English learners or students with disabilities who are integrated into the traditional classrooms. There'd be over 1,700 more slots for NC pre-K if the plan were fully implemented by 2028. Big increases for the Smart Start funding and the infant toddler program, number of children being served. So it's really about providing these resources that are needed to meet the constitutional standards. So I'll drop in the chat when I'm done here links to some of the stuff on this Every Child NC website. But just really proud of this group. This is something that really seems to resonate with people. We managed to hang together for a couple of years in the pandemic. People have showed out for all kinds of events. We've had all kinds of advocacy days and press events, and this is clearly something that moves people. I think people are experiencing this in different ways in their schools right now, whether it's inadequate facilities, highly inadequate in some cases, whether it's shortages of teachers, bus drivers. I think a lot of people are shocked that there's no nurse in their classroom on a daily basis. The nurse will rotate from school to school, might only be there for a day or two each week, which is kind of crazy to me. So I think a lot of these resources are things that people are really hungry for, and they can see what's lacking in their own local schools, but we're trying to make that connection. I think a lot of people think school is such a local issue that when people have problems with some of these things, they go to their local school board or county commissions and those types of things. They don't understand that in North Carolina, 60% of school funding and resources comes from the state level. The state plays a huge role in terms of funding and policy changes of what your school looks like locally. And so we're working to try to help demystify some of this, talk about the potential of the plan, builds a bit of I think we're building a movement that needs to accompany this type of massive change in terms of who gets educational opportunities in the states. I'll stop there and drop some of these resources in the chat. And I'll also drop an article about the case just if people want to read a little bit more about it. But I really appreciate you having me here today, and stick around for any questions at the end. Thank you. Back to Deb or over to Robert.
Thank you so much, Matt. We really appreciate this work. It's just amazing. And I'm really hoping that we actually see some of this. I mean, that's always the thing about Leandro. It's just been going, when I first discovered it, I was like, wait, how long has this been going on? I mean, it's just like, it's fairly unbelievable. And so, hopefully the ramifications and the consequences of that decision and sort of the funding will actually just start to appear, which would be great. So thank you so much for your work and for being with us today. Bob Schaeffer, we are so happy to have you here with us today to talk about sort of other ways that schools can increase their accessibility. And I'm a huge fan of FairTest. So thank you so much. Take it away.
Thanks, Deb, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. I'm Bob Schaeffer. I'm the Public Education Director of FairTest, the National Fair and Open Testing. We've worked with many of you on efforts to encourage schools in North Carolina to go ACT, SAT optional, as your state university system is now for the next couple of years, and appreciate the opportunity to collaborate. Let me say at the onset, FairTest supports Harvard and the University of North Carolina positions on race-conscious admissions. We would hope that the Supreme Court rules as David has argued that they should, but we're realists, and we know that there needs to be contingency planning, at least for less than perfect decision coming from the Supreme Court. And in thinking this through with a number of our allies, and we FairTest did submit an amicus brief in the current Supreme Court case, in working with ACES and ACCEPT counseling groups, arguing that the court should allow Harvard and the University of North Carolina to go forward with their current policies. We also argued in the Grutter case that affirmative action is a justifiable policy, if only to offset the biases in educational systems that Matt and others have described. So, we hope that David is right, but we got to be prepared in case he wasn't successful in persuading a Supreme Court majority. And so in thinking about it, down here. I'm a little computer glitch here, please, for a moment. Well, in thinking about contingencies, what happens if the court rules otherwise in the case of in the North Carolina case? I'm gonna go back to the screen where I can maneuver it better. There we go. If the court does not rule in favor of North Carolina, both colleges and high school counselors and other stakeholders need to be thinking about what to do as an alternative. And we believe, based on our experience, that there are several things schools can still do legally to encourage diversity. And the first is to eliminate consideration of ACT and SAT results, either test optional or preferably test blind policies, and arguing that they should be removed because they are race conscious factors. If such factors are to be removed, all such factors should be removed. And because of the strong correlation between test scores and demographics, race in particular, using them in the admissions process makes them race conscious. The proponents of the lawsuits, allegedly students for fair admissions, can't have it both ways. If they want admissions to be fair as they define it and no consideration of race, then test scores shouldn't be considered as well. They ought to stop considering schools, not admissions offices, should stop considering AP enrollment and AP exam scores in the admissions review process, because opportunities to take those courses as well as test results are strongly correlated with race. If they can't consider race, they can consider socioeconomic status and geography as non-race conscious factors. David mentioned percent plans. That's one way to do it. There are other ways to consider zip codes and other measures that, because of ongoing segregation in our society, would help promote more diversity in the higher education pipeline. Schools, higher education admissions offices need to end the practice of purchasing recruitment lists based on student test score ranges because of the racial skew in those scores. When you specify a particular high test score range to recruit from, you are skewing that pool in a particular racial composition. And they should reach out more and heavily in communities with high populations of historically underrepresented potential students. I mean, FairTest is known as the test optional organization, but we've never said that test optional is a magic bullet that can compensate for all the other problems in the system. It is one important piece, but even schools that have gone test optional, say the University of Chicago, have coupled that with other factors to encourage diversity, particularly better recruiting and more money for kids who need assistance. On the high school side, if the court again rules that all race-conscious factors should be removed from the admissions process, high schools and district offices can help by making sure that test scores do not appear automatically on transcripts. The test scores belong to students. If a student wants to submit a test score, fine, that's their right in a test optional world, but schools should not be preferencing the use of test scores by including them. If you're going to include AP and IB, Cambridge program results on your transcripts, include the context of what's available, what kind of kids actually enroll in such courses. In the student counseling sides, help your students understand which colleges and universities will evaluate applicants in a manner that does not include race-conscious factors, and encourage students from historically underrepresented demographics to apply to those schools. Counselors have a strong influence and can encourage positive feedback to schools that look to increase diversity by encouraging your students to apply to them. And similarly, on the student side, encouraging those students to apply to institutions which have clearly defined ACT and SAT optional policies or as test blind policies, not those that are grudgingly taking those positions. Reward schools that are making the effort and encourage your kids to apply to them. So just Deb asked me to talk a little bit about the status of test optional to wrap this up. Right now, about 80% of all colleges and universities are ACT optional or test blind for fall 2023. More than 1,500 of them have said those policies will extend at least through 2024 entering class. More than half of all schools in the country are now permanently, as permanent as anything is in this business, permanently test optional. Very few schools have restored SAT requirements. The 3 southern red state public university systems, Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee have, over the objections of admissions officials. Appointed boards of political leaders have reinstated test scores, and a handful of private institutions, particularly Georgetown, Purdue, and MIT. But the vast majority of other schools remain test optional. And a very important next step is many schools are extending test optional policies to financial aid. We recognize that a positive admissions decision without the money to go to school to enroll and stay matriculated is a pretty meaningless endeavor. Just a quick bar graph showing the growth of test optional and the stability over the last 3 years. Yes, there was a significant growth with the with COVID, but it's now stabilized as the new normal. Looking forward, test optional policies give an opportunity to show that it works. Historically, when schools pilot test optional, they become permanent. The demographic reality is going to discourage schools from reinstating test scores because it's going to be a more competitive environment from the school's perspective. And the fact that the largest and most prestigious public university systems in the country are permanently test blind will set a model that other schools will need to consider. And indeed, on the West Coast of the United States, every public university is now permanently test optional or test blind. Where we think this is all going is that nearly all schools extend their test optional and test blind plans, that the data will continue to show that they increase diversity without undermining academic excellence. There are other factors out there. Kids love test optional. Less than half of students submitted test scores last year to schools where they had an option, and that seems to be remaining steady this year. And that the SAT and ACT aren't going away. It's not ever been our goal, but they're going to be less important. It's a handful of selective schools may require them, just as those schools required, the SAT essay or SAT subject tests, but the vast majority, they will not be a requirement. And finally, more schools decouple test scores from financial aid because test scores do not measure merit. We're glad to help you at any time. Please give us a call or send an email. I'm Bob Schaeffer at fairtest.org, and we're pleased to work with counselors and admissions officials in North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate it. And I deeply appreciate, I know we all do the work that you do as well. So what I'd love to do, we've got a few minutes. If people have questions, if you want to drop them in the chat, if you want to raise your hand, if you have a comment, please just jump in. It would be great. Otherwise, I've got some questions I'd like to ask too. Anyone? Questions, concerns? Okay, I'm gonna ask some questions. What are your thoughts, and David, Matt, and Robert, whoever wants to answer first? I think one of the things that happens for us is that it often seems like these national things or these sort of big things, these big cases, these things are happening beyond our control, right? And so I think a really good question to ask is, what can individual counselors do? What can individual school counselors, independent counselors, admissions officers, what are some of the steps that you think that individuals can take to sort of impact any of these, some of these much bigger trends? What are some of the ways that people can get involved and engaged and sort of feel more that they are a part of sort of the narrative and a part of sort of what's happening? If anyone has thoughts about that. I can see a lot of thinking like, ooh, what can individuals do? This is the challenge, right? Like, what are ways that people can get involved, do you think?
Well, selfishly, I would definitely encourage people to go to the Every Child NC website and you can sign up as a partner. I think we do try to send out updates on opportunities for people to take action who are interested in the, supporting the investments that are laid out in the Leandro plan. So there's all kinds of different places that action happens because this involves the governor's office, the State Board of Education, things happening at the legislature. So we're often trying to drive, numbers of people to those different places, encouraging them to take action around the case, whether it's asking for an executive order to implement some of the, the funding allocations that are required by the case, or Is it getting the legislature to fund some of the positions? And there's a lot of support for early childhood. Is there a way to move, like, are there pieces of the puzzle that we can move in different places? Sometimes it's the State Board of Education that we're asking to take some action with their legislative priorities. So I would really, selfishly, we want to grow that group, and we were happy to have 144 organizations participate in the brief. We'd like to have it be more going forward. That was a lot. I think some of the most that we've seen nationally signing on to something like that. There was also a coalition of business organizations that signed on, which we think is really crucial for people who have relationships there. That, sometimes that's the only way to get things done in North Carolina, is to have the support of the business community, particularly when it comes to dealing with the legislature. And there is a lot of support around some of the recommendations, but I've mentioned that it's a polarizing issue, or seen as one, and at least at the legislature. So that business support could be really critical. But we try to always offer people ways to participate, and we are always up for having events, public education events locally. We think that there's a way to we have all kinds of local school board and county commission resolutions that people can use to try to get their boards to support this plan. And we've had a lot of success with that. And we think there's bipartisan support locally for this, because it would help take the pressure off a lot of county commissions and school boards if they were getting more resources from the state. So there's plenty of opportunities to engage there, and we do try to keep people up to speed on what those might be.
Just building on what Matt said, counselors can do substantial public education and advocacy work, talking about the importance of diversity and highlighting institutions that are actually doing the work to promote it. In North Carolina, in a year or so, there's going to be another decision about whether to continue to have a state university system that is test optional. That's a political decision, and there needs to be lobbying and public information events to put pressure on the decision makers to keep that policy in place. There's a lot you can do, because you are the experts on the high school to college transition, and you should be speaking out to promote the vision that we all share.
And I think that's one of the things that I, working in this committee, actually have discovered is how often people will answer my emails, actually, which has been delightful and surprising sometimes. And phone calls. David Hinojosa accidentally picked up the phone when I first called. I thought I was going to leave a message, and I got him, which was, I know he was very surprised, but it was amazing and delightful for me. So I think that's one of the things I think too, that hopefully, but from both sides of the table, right? So from both the high school counselor, the independent counselor, and from the college admission side, reaching out to folks. And that's one of the reasons I love SACAC so much as an organization. Reaching out to folks and having those conversations, I think, can be really important. And I think for those of us, particularly on the high school side, college admissions officers don't necessarily see what's happening to students when they're applying to multiple institutions. So they see what's happening when they're applying to their institution, but they don't understand the sort of broader perspective. And I think that the more that we can communicate, here's what our students are going through every day. Here's what what's happening to them when they're applying to multiple institutions. These are the things they're facing. I think the more that we can share that, really advocate on behalf of our students, I think is important. David, I'm going to give you the final word. Do you have thoughts about ways that folks, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, do you have thoughts about ways that folks can do, sort of individuals can really get engaged with some of this work? Oh, you're muted. You're muted, David. Oh, no, we can't hear you. Oh, no, we've lost David.
He said he'd been going in and out of tunnels, rather.
Oh, no.
Maybe he's okay.
Are you back? Can we hear you?
Do you hear me?
Yes. Yay.
Okay. I super apologize. Yeah, I've been in and out of tunnels, and I didn't even know that. My second time traveling by train to New York from DC, and I didn't even know that there were tunnels, which I'm like, I've been working way too hard on my traveling to and from DC to New York. did not even realize that I had tunnels. I've never been on doing a presentation, obviously. Yeah, I appreciate your patience. So it's an important work, depending on what capacity that you're at, is to, still have, racial equity and justice as a goal. We still need gender, disability, income, and all these other characteristics to make sure that students who are underserved, who are underrepresented, receive as much, support and guidance so they can participate meaningfully in the system. What students need is the fair and just opportunity to succeed and participate in college and in life. And so whatever the outcome is, we've talked about, different situations, but I think, as individuals themselves, what can they do to help make this world, a better place for the people that they're serving? And I think that having that, as a simple guidepost, not suggesting that there's a one-size-fits-all approach, because what we all know is that absolutely does not work and serve students and communities. But again, happy to continue the conversation remotely, and again, really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much again. And thank you so much again to all of our presenters. I just think my brain is sort of going whoop, whoop, because I just feel like it has really expanded my knowledge base and just sort of the things to think about, right? And the kinds of ways that we can approach our work. So deeply, deeply appreciate everything that you all do. I am actually going to copy and paste all of the links for anyone who's interested. I will copy and paste those, and we'll follow up with an email to everyone, to all of the participants. And we have, just so you all know, we had about 45 other folks who signed up, but they typically we record all of our sessions, so they'll get all the recording and all the information that was in this session as well. Thank you so much for your work, for the work that you do. And we hope that everyone has a really wonderful and safe and peaceful holiday. If anyone ever has questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Jane Ann or myself. I hope everyone has a really great admission season. Thank you so much.